Hey everybody, it's Pastor Megan, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Advent, which is a very special time. It's a time when people put up more twinkly lights. It's next week will be the beginning of Hanukkah, and we will have folk starting to light their menorah and put light into the world. It is a time that pagans have celebrated for a really long time because the solstice, the darkness that happens all around our globe as the sun retreats a bit, and it takes a little bit more time in the dark of night than we typically have. And there's a lot of fun ways to kind of think about Advent and think of this time of fabulous lights in the middle of the darkness. And one of the ways that I particularly appreciate is to be able to be with family, to be able to be with folk that are beloved ones. Hey, speaking of beloved ones popping up, it's good to see you.
Hi, how's it going?
Would you be willing to introduce yourself to everybody?
For sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Bonnie Violet. And I'm a queer chaplain.
Yeah. And so I was just telling everyone about what Advent is, about this time of people wanting to be intentional about bringing light into the world. And we're in the same space because tomorrow, Saturday at 3:00, we're going to have an Advent drag show and fundraiser. If folk want to learn more about that, you can go to tinyurl.com/Advent drag. But would you be willing to share with people kind of what drag is and what it means to you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been doing drag for a couple of years now, and drag is an opportunity for me to, I think, express parts that have been in me forever that I was never really allowed to let out. Growing up a sissy in a trailer house in Idaho, I wasn't really allowed to be so femme, and I feel like it allows me to catch up a little bit now in my 40s with, like, letting out some of that femininity and just having some fun.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is really fun about drag is that it helps people explore another side of themselves, but that exploration typically is done in community, yeah, which is not kind of the way most people think about exploring a side of themselves that's typically hidden. And so there's something kind of lovely about drag community, I think. You have a lovely podcast where you actually talk to people about both their work doing drag and spirituality. Would you talk a little bit about that for people who maybe don't know what that is?
Yeah, for sure. As a queer chaplain, my goal is really to help queer folks see that you can exist in your fullest expression and have some sort of spirituality. And for me, my transness and my expression it's a gift directly from my relationship with God and my connection with the divine. And so what I do is I try to bring to light folks who are doing drag and help them lace their narrative with a spiritual thread. So I interview them and they talk with me about, what it was like growing up. A lot of drag artists are, queer or trans, or, some are cis, and some aren't queer. So I try to interview a lot of different folks just to get a sense of how drag may be informed by or not by their spirituality.
One of the things that's really inspired me, particularly as someone who lives in San Francisco, is how during the midst of the AIDS epidemic, people use drag to laugh during
Mm-hmm.
the most unhappy of times. And drag as a performance piece has been healing to a lot of communities, because in the midst of the deepest, thickest hopelessness, there is a spirit of camp, or a spirit of being able to not take your life too seriously, even when your life is the most serious thing you have. Do you have any thoughts about how drag is helpful for resilience, particularly with everything people are going through right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can, I mean, it can do a lot of different things, right? Drag can tell stories, it can bring levity and joy, it can just bring a smile to people's face. And for me, I identify spirituality as anything that lifts me,
Mm-hmm.
and elevates me. And I think as queer folks, sometimes we got to get a little creative. And I think drag is a way that just automatically, just lifts people's spirits. I think that's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I worked for 12 years doing chaplaincy with the homeless in Hungary, and one of the things that I kind of noticed during that time, particularly because I was working with queer homeless folk, is that drag can be done at every social economic level, and sometimes the best drag comes from like needing to make a dress from an old picnic table you found out of a dumpster because you don't have access to thousands of dollars for like wigs and sparkles, and it's something I've been really appreciative that it's an art form that people of every demographic can kind of participate in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important for people to see that there is a variety of drag style and
Mhm.
investment, because, a lot of drag is being consumed by mainstream, but it's kind of a certain type of drag. It's a lot of money is put into it and certain things. And that's just one lane. There's just so many varieties to expressing oneself in drag. And I think any opportunity to just see more is just awesome.
How has it been during this time of a lot of sheltering in place and not being able to go? Like, so a lot of drag community has traditionally been in places like nightlife scenes and bars, and this in some ways is a whole new world. What has it been like during this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's very different, for some of us artists, for me, I think I've found my medium. Like, I think I do better with virtual kind of like filmed, edited, type of performance.
Mhm.
Whereas other folks who kind of feed from the audience, from being on stage, I think they've had a little bit harder time with it. And so folks are pre-making videos that are edited and then submitting those and creating drag performances that way, or other folks are kind of going live like we are right now, and they would do a lip sync performance like this. And then some folks are putting on masks and going out to the street and, just performing on the street and keeping social distance. So folks are getting really, I guess, really creative.
Yeah, and when the creativity is feeding life and not putting people at risk, it's always kind of a beautiful thing to see. And what I'm appreciating about recorded performances is it gives people the ability to really kind of perfect the angles and the art that they want to share with people in a way that hasn't existed before. And so it's really lovely to see some of the ways that people are able to kind of expand the artwork of what they're doing by having new tools to be able to.
Yeah, and that's like a blessing in some ways and kind of a curse, because I think one of the great things about performance,
Yeah.
especially, you get like one take.
Yes.
So the kind of the fumbleness, the mistakes, the like, oops, my tit fell out, or like
Hmm.
those sorts of things are sometimes what makes a show like just a little, I don't know, more fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and now people are sending their tips virtually
Hmm.
rather than stuffing them places or throwing them, and so that's a whole different experience as well, I imagine.
Yeah, and in some ways, it does allow your performance to live longer. So, folks are able to create maybe a performance for a certain event, and then they're able to post that on social media or kind of put it out in the world, and then people can actually, you know, tip whenever they see it. So I think it's almost a way in some ways that people could bring in a little bit more income potentially from their performance as well.
Yeah, I hope so. What are the do you have any like December time rituals that you do to like keep the sparkle alive in where you dwell?
I you kind of cut out there for a second. What was the question?
Oh, I was wondering if you had any December rituals of how you keep kind of the sparkle of spirituality alive in your house.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting with with COVID and everything. It's like I'm just in my room all by myself. So actually was kind of thinking about that today. What are some things that I could do for me? It feels like it's for me. It's
Mm-hmm.
not for like anyone else because I'm not having anyone in my space. So I'm like, well, what is it that I want to do for me? And so I guess I'm still kind of figuring that out.
Is there any support or care that you or you think maybe the drag queen community would be interested in during this time of sheltering?
Well, yeah, I mean, for a lot of drag artists and stuff, they're really struggling. It's not a job in which you have benefits and it's not a job that you have a lot of security. So folks that were doing pretty well are definitely kind of potentially struggling in a lot of ways. So I think if folks are able to, go to shows and tip a little extra or do those sorts of things, I think that would be a great thing to do for the drag community at this point in time.
Are you hoping that folk who are doing fundraisers or doing events will extend invitations as well? Is that a thing that, like, because that's what I always wonder when trying to invite people who are performers. I'm sure it's an individual thing, but I'm always nervous that reaching out will make people feel like they're being bothered, and it's probably just the opposite, that people are looking for opportunities to perform in this kind of new world.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think folks are pretty receptive. I'm working on another drag and spirituality series in Chicago right now. And so I was literally just direct messaging people on Instagram and saying, hey, like, do you want to talk about spirituality and drag? And some folks were really hip on it and some folks were not so much. So I think it just kind of depends on the person.
Would you be willing to speak about where your personal faith is rooted and how you see that in the world?
Yeah, so I grew up Christian. I brought myself up Christian in like a United Methodist and then non-denominational kind of faith. I was a total Jesus freak, very much an evangelist.
Yes.
I went to, initially I wanted to be a youth pastor and work with young people. And then, at 19, I became, I usually use more colorful language, but I became a gay person with HIV. I was diagnosed with HIV, and it pushed me out of the church because I didn't feel like I could bring all of me into church. And it took me a while. It took me a lot of drugs and alcohol, and eventually getting into sobriety 13 years ago. That
Congratulations.
that it kind of like created an opening to the possibility that I could have God in my life again and I could actually come to rely on God. I don't think I'd ever relied really on God before until I got into sobriety, and seeing queer folk and folks who you'd think didn't have spirituality talking about God and talking about higher power stuff. Like it was really kind of exciting, and they were having lives that I kind of thought I could never have. And so that's a lot of why I do what I do, is I want people to see that it's possible. Like I lacked the imagination for so long because I just wasn't around anything and I didn't get to see anything. And being able to get out in the world a little bit has like sparked my imagination, and it's really allowed me to find myself.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like, at least from the ways that I've been able to kind of engage with your work via kind of like seeing what happens online, it seems like you do have a lot of opportunities of getting out there. Do you want to talk about why the name chaplain is a part of how you identify?
Yeah, so queer chaplain, I feel called to be with people around death and dying. And I feel like death and dying to self. So not in the physical body, but in our identities. So for me, I've had to really die to the person I thought I was in order to become the person that I am and to continue to go through that process. And it's been a lifelong process. And oftentimes I wasn't allowed to claim any sort of spirituality throughout that process. And I think it made it really challenging. So I want to help people invite spirit spirituality, God, whatever sort of thing that they can think of into that space and into that experience, and to actually claim it and call it that. I think there's power in calling it. You know, we might learn how to dance on the dance floor and life, but I think it's important to say, no, like, this is a gift of God, this is a gift of the universe, my higher power, whatever. And like, because of that, like, I'm going to like get my life and live my best life. Yeah, kind of got lost a little bit, but so I've been doing everything I can. What's that?
No, you're doing great. Preach on.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been just doing anything I can to, again, just to try to meet more people. I had an aunt who actually, she introduced me to church when I was like 4 or 5, and when I came out, I was living with her. We were really close, and then all of a sudden, she couldn't. You know, her prayers changed for me. You know, she started praying that I wouldn't be gay. She started praying that Jesus people would come into my life and fix me. You know, and for 20 years we didn't have a relationship, and 2 years ago we were able, 20 years later, to kind of like sit at the same table, her as a conservative Christian and me as a transgender queer drag queen, like try to like be in relationship with each other. And so we actually created a podcast called Splintered Grace, and we just finished our 12th week of that this week, and basically we're just, you know, so many families are choosing not to be in communication anymore, you know, because it's too hard to talk about race, or it's too hard to talk about politics or God or Jesus or gender or any of that sort of stuff. So they're just like, screw it, I'm just not even going to deal with it. And so I don't know, we just wanted to not have that with one another, and we've had a lot of success with it, and we wanted to try to help people see that it is possible.
That's really lovely. I appreciate that you have named for me something that I really wish was easier to share with other people in the queer community, which is that people aren't ever frozen in time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they change and evolve just as our bodies and our preferences and some of our romantic lives evolve and change over time. And it's such a lovely thing to hear people kind of telling that story more often, rather than assuming that the first reaction someone might have to you is the final and always reaction that someone's going to have to you. And so it's been a real blessing to kind of see you model that through conversations, but also I think to kind of fully embody that in the way that you are in the world.
Yeah, well, I've gotten to a place in my life where I can't not, you know, like, it's just, which is a beautiful place to be. And so, you know, I can't help myself. Half the time I don't know why I do what I do, but I just feel like it's something that makes sense in the moment. And it helps me. So hopefully it helps others too.
Well, since you've kind of centered yourself as someone who's called to grief work, and we're in the middle of just a pile of grief, all the different types of grief in the world, do you have any words that you could share with folk who are just feeling really in the thick of it right now about how they can, particularly in how they can grieve without groups? So many grief rituals involve having groups around, and many people don't have access to that. Do you have any thoughts you can share with people who are grieving?
Yeah, well, I feel like some of the, you know, because I feel like this shelter in place has created an opportunity for some people to make some changes in their life that they've been wanting to for a while, and kind of like, I think just creating some sort of ritual or pattern can be really helpful in just kind of keeping you in moments of having remembering kind of the better stuff, so that you can. And then I don't know, I think it's a difficult thing because I just try to sit through it, and try to connect in some way, whether it's a phone call or a text, or I don't know, it can be a difficult thing. Pray, light candles, just try.
Well, and I think what this conversation hopefully is illustrating to people is that you might feel alone with your grief, but the number of people that you could have a conversation with is really diverse, right? If you want to talk to a therapist, talk to a therapist. You want to talk to a pastor, talk to a pastor. You want to talk to a drag queen, talk to a drag queen. But by golly, connect with someone as you
Right.
go through this.
Well, and if you're on social media, it's really easy just to go live like we are. You know, like I started some of my work just by, I started doing walk and talks where I would just walk and talk. And I started talking about whiteness initially because I was like, how do I respond to Black Lives Matters as a white person? How do I, like, what do I do as somebody who's getting ready to go back to work, you know, and I can't be out protesting? And so I just started talking about my experience with whiteness from a child to today and just kind of explored that for myself, but I did it out loud in a way in which other people could kind of like participate. And I don't know, I think just do something, like, I don't know, do it.
Yeah, just start, just come on, everybody.
Right. And I know that sounds easy. It's really hard to reach out, especially when you're feeling some sort of way. Yeah, but it's just so powerful. And you know, if you can't do it for yourself, think of what it might do for somebody else. I know sometimes that helps me to think, is there somebody else that might be struggling more than me? And that can really kind of help me get out of myself and my situation. But you know, grief and pain is just part of the process, and the more we fight it and the more we it's gonna come at some point. So it's, I think we could do what we can to try to like just face it, and be kind to ourselves in whatever way we respond to going through that pain. Because I think we're all going to do something to kind of soothe ourselves and comfort ourselves, and just, I think, just have compassion for ourselves through that process.
Yeah. Well, so the sheltering can be limiting for people who are interested in having lots of community people around. Yeah. On the other hand, it can also be 100% freedom for folk who might be interested in exploring a trans part of their life, or maybe exploring a drag part of their life, because they can experiment with how they want to dress when nobody's looking. They can experiment with new ways of walking, new ways of lip syncing, right? Like new ways of relating. If there's anyone out there who is interested or has been interested in starting experimenting with drag, and they're at home and they've got some time and they've got, you know, the beads or whatever it is in their imagination of how that manifests, do you have any advice for people who might want to tip a toe into drag during this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really big thing is just, you know, never wait until you can do it perfect. Like just do it and try, you know, and if you need to try it with yourself, by yourself, do that. And then one thing that I think is helpful, like in any situation, is if you know somebody who does drag that you really like their type of drag, or there's a certain show or event that you really like, you know, seek out the people in that situation. Maybe offer to say, hey, do you need another artist for your show? Or, you know, reaching out to one of your favorite drag artists and saying, hey, you know, like, I'm wanting to get started, and like, what advice do you have for me? But, and also YouTube, there's just lots of really great stuff for drag kings and queens and other royalty. So there's just a lot out there to kind of like help you through that exploration.
Mm-hmm. But, you know, do you have advice like start with the heels or?
Oh,
I'm just teasing.
yeah. I mean, you know, one of the things about, you know, this type of drag is like, you only have to dress from like the chest up, or, you know, like it just depends. I haven't been in heels that much, which I miss, being in shelter in place.
There you go. More Instagram lives for people to do their drag shows so they can see it from there to there. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I've, you know, you could also even just do one with your friends, like over Zoom. I had a friend who had a birthday party and he asked me to perform. So I just lip sync over Zoom at his birthday party. So I think there's lots of ways that we can kind of put ourselves out there and just try it.
Yeah, it's also a good time for binge watching all of the like old school movies that can, like Priscilla Queen of the Desert. You don't have to pay attention to the plot, but just like watch how like fabrics can flow in the wind and the things you can do with sparkles, and it's a lovely time to take in the culture from folk.
Yeah, definitely. And Instagram is a great place to find lots of inspiration.
Well, I'm so grateful that you had some time to chat with me, and that you're participating in the drag show that we're hosting tomorrow. For those who didn't get the link at the beginning, if you go to tinyurl.com/Advent Drag, you can check out the show tomorrow. What's a good way for people to connect with you, and some of the ways they can tap in with some of the cool stuff like your podcast that you're up to?
Yeah, I mean, if they just search for a queer chaplain, I have a YouTube channel with everything. I have a couple of podcasts that have all the interviews with drag queens and other trans folks and faith leaders. So I think just searching a queer chaplain or Bonnie Violet, you're gonna find me. And like if you're on Instagram, you can go to a queer chaplain or Sparkle is as Sparkle does, and go to the link in the bio, and it'll take you to all my work. And yeah, and you can message me. I'd love to talk with you and try to connect you to whatever it is that you want to get connected with. So thanks so much for asking me to be a part of the show and to doing this right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody go follow a queer chaplain.
Yes.
All right.
That'd be great.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.